The wealthy, the affluent, the obese upper classes, these were the circles in which Chakwanho belonged without question. He was a man to whom all those titles applied, someone who had not only entered the world of business, but had dominated it with unmatched discipline and intellect. That was the kind of father Chanoke had known his whole life, a man both revered and feared. As for Chanoke himself, he had been born into that privilege, though not by blood. His life with the Cha family began when his older brother, as a young boy, had once approached their father with an oddly innocent yet impactful request. He had declared that he wanted a little brother, and had phrased it bluntly, demanded to buy him a little brother. At those mere words, without much thought or hesitation, Chanoke had been adopted. He had become part of the family, stepping into the role of younger son and younger brother when he had just turned 5. His father had given him a life overflowing with comfort, luxury, and status, one that could not be compared to anyone else's. His older brother, in those early years, had treated him with warmth and affection, cherishing him more than anything. For a time, they had felt like a truly happy family, one bound together not just by names and photographs, but by laughter, dinners, and the shared image of unity. But that illusion had its limits. As the years passed, the fondness from his brother began to fade. Slowly but surely, the warmth turned lukewarm and eventually cold. The bond that once felt strong became something fragile and awkward. From a young age, Chanoke had felt that something was missing, that some invisible wall separated him from the others. That wall grew thicker and higher with time, until it felt as though he were on the other side entirely. Though they raised him as part of the family, it sometimes felt like they had taken in a stray dog for fun, something temporary, a gesture made out of boredom or curiosity. They did their best to treat him kindly, perhaps because it was their father and brother who had made the decision to bring him in. But kindness, Chano came to realize, was not the same as love. 2 decades later, when he had long since become an adult, he saw his family again. It had been many years. They were brought together not by celebration, but by loss. His father had passed away. Chanok, now a grown man, looked upon the man who had shaped his life in so many ways. Even in death, his father's face remained composed and cold, exactly as he had remembered. Those who gathered at the funeral mourned deeply, their sadness raw and visible. But there was one exception, his older brother, Cha Chan Yol, who showed no sadness whatsoever. His indifference was stark and chilling, and it carried more meaning than words ever could. Not long after the funeral, the truth began to unravel. As news of their father's vast fortune emerged, Chan Yol cut off all contact with everyone, including Chanok. The family, who had once promised to care for him as their own, turned their backs. They shifted their priorities, placing more value on the memory and legacy of their father than on the adopted son, who remained among them. Chanok watched in silence as his entire reality crumbled. Just as his father's presence disappeared, so too did every belief he had clung to. The ideals that had guided his actions, his unwavering gratitude, his belief in kindness, and the comforting idea that shared burdens grew lighter, began to dissolve. For most of his life, he had lived selflessly, giving without asking, loving without expecting anything in return. He had believed that joy multiplied when shared and that pain, too, became more bearable when divided. He had not lived in a way that invited criticism or contempt. And yet, the person who first condemned him, the one who struck him hardest when he was down, had been his wife, the woman to whom he had once sworn eternal love. Memories flashed through his mind, sharp and painful. He could still hear her voice, angry and raw, demanding to know how he could still laugh after losing everything. She had shouted at him, her words cutting deep, accusing him of smiling while standing amidst the ruins of his life. In confusion, he had asked her why. If she had ever meant to live for their family, she hadn't fought for them, but her response had left him shattered. Through tears, she had called him a good man, but a fool. She told him he had been deceived and walked away, leaving him alone, finalizing their separation with a divorce. In the present, as he lay in bed, his mind heavy with memories, Chanok found himself spiraling. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of his phone. It was a call from his son. With a tired voice, he picked up and greeted him, asking what was wrong. Without delay, his son requested a sum of money, 3 million won. The number struck him like a stone. He responded quietly, remarking that it was a large amount, but added that he had many things to pay for. His son pressed again, asking if he truly couldn't arrange it. Chanok replied that he would try to find a way, no matter what. He asked for time and promised to get back to him later that same day. While the call was still active, he glanced at the family photo frame placed beside his bed. It held a picture of him and his son from happier days. Looking at it, he sighed and apologized, whispering to himself that he was sorry for being so incapable. Then, as if resolving something silently, he told his son he would arrange the money and softly added, "I love you." But before he could end the call, he overheard his son speaking with a friend. The friend asked what his father had said, and his son laughed, saying his dad had just told him to wait. Then, with cruel casualness, he added that his ATM was being emotional lately, so the response had been slow. The two boys burst into laughter, mocking the man who had just offered them love. Chanoke ended the call without a word. The sting of betrayal settled heavily in his chest. Deep inside, he had already known why a college student would ask for such a large amount of money. But hearing it spoken aloud with such carelessness confirmed what he had feared, that there was no one left he could truly rely on, no one to turn to, no one who cared. His eyes drifted to another photo frame, this one containing a picture of himself with his father and older brother. He studied the face of the man who had once ruled their world and thought to himself that only someone like his father could find a way out of this. He chuckled bitterly at his own thoughts that why he is really seeking help from someone who was no longer alive. He then looked at his brother's face in the photograph and questioned his own sanity, that who was he thinking of? Maybe he really was going mad. Still, as shameful as it felt, a part of him whispered that he had to try, he had to go to his brother and ask for help. With quiet determination, Chano got up, dressed, and made his way to his brother's house. Upon arrival, he rang the video intercom system. A woman's voice answered, asking who it was. He replied that it was him, Chanoke, and that he was there to see his brother. She responded that his brother wasn't home. Recognizing the voice, he addressed her as his sister-in-law and asked if she had been well. Her response was cool and nonchalant. Just so-so. She followed her greeting with a question of her own, asking what had brought him there so suddenly. She reminded him that they were never close enough for an unexpected visit like this. He hesitated briefly, then replied that things had simply happened that way. With humility, he asked if she could spare a moment of her time. He admitted that he knew he was being shameless and assured her that she could refuse if it was too much trouble. Even so, he pleaded softly for just a little bit of her time, not long, just enough to be heard. His sister-in-law opened it and welcomed him in, suggesting he come inside so they could discuss whether the matter was long or not. She casually mentioned that he could even keep his shoes on indoors. He thanked her politely and stepped inside. She remarked that, in any case, her husband wasn't around at the moment. Glancing at him, she added with a faint smile that she should probably start calling him brother-in-law now. She then noticed the somber expression on his face and questioned him, asking why he looked so gloomy. She wondered aloud why he was acting like that. He looked at her, trying to grasp the point she was making, and asked what she meant. She gave a slight sigh and asked if he truly didn't understand their shared circumstances, motioning for him to sit comfortably on the couch. She went to prepare a drink for him and returned, offering it with a calm expression as she asked, "What's the matter that brought her brother-in-law here?" It was evident that he had come to ask for something, though he was struggling with his pride. She noticed the nervousness and worry in his demeanor and asked him directly what was wrong, adding that something definitely seemed off about him. She also commented that he must have had enough leisure to take his time coming over. Then, out of nowhere, he suddenly blurted out a request. He asked her to lend him some money. She set her glass aside and, without a hint of emotion, asked how much he needed. After a brief pause of hesitation, he responded softly that he needed 3 million won. She stared at him, stunned, and exclaimed how absurd it was. She asks, "Do you really need that much money?" Chanoke lowered his gaze, apologizing earnestly and assuring her that he didn't mean to make her uncomfortable. He promised to pay her back as soon as possible and begged her to help him just this once. But her tone turned sarcastic as she questioned his ability to repay her. Even if he had been adopted, she reminded him, he had once been called the son of a man who was regarded as a king. Yet now here he was, crawling to her for help. Not for 300 million or even 30 million, but just 3 million won. She scoffed at his audacity and added that the only reason she hadn't caused a scene was because her husband wasn't home. Otherwise, it would have been quite the spectacle. Leaning closer to him, she whispered that his late father would have been proud to witness such a fall from grace. She reminded him that it was precisely because of his current, pathetic state that the woman who used to be his wife was now doing cardio workouts with other men. Her words struck him deeply, and he felt overwhelmed with shame and insult. Trying to maintain some composure, he responded that he was sorry, admitting that the last comment was a bit too much. He confessed that he had his own burdens lately and had been feeling increasingly sensitive. She sighed and advised him to clear his head, mentioning that she needed to go to her room for a bit. As she walked away, he turned his eyes to the family photo hanging on the wall. It was a picture of his brother, his sister-in-law, and their daughter. Just then, she suddenly reappeared behind him and asked whether he thought her daughter was pretty. He replied sincerely that she had indeed grown a lot since the last time he had seen her. She laughed and remarked how thankful she was that her daughter didn't resemble her father at all. They both chuckled at that, and in the next moment, she handed him a bundle of cash, 3 million won. He looked down at it with a wave of gratitude, expressing his sincere thanks. However, her eyes narrowed with a teasing glint, and she added that if he agreed to do a little cardio training with her today, she might give him a bit more on top of that. His face turned pale with nervousness, and he hesitantly asked her what she meant by that. She calmly replied that it had been a long time since either of them had been alone. She confessed that she couldn't even recall the last time the man who was supposed to be her husband had come home. Still looking alarmed, he tried to dismiss her words and asked what she was talking about. She stared back at him and reminded him of what she had said earlier. They were both in the same situation. She proposed they take revenge. She would get back at her husband, and he could get revenge on his ex-wife. She assured him there was no need to pretend or hide anything, as she already knew he hadn't been with anyone since his divorce. She could sense the desire he had been suppressing for so long and offered to release it all, suggesting that they could make a perfect partnership in the so-called wrestling. He looked more and more uncomfortable, repeating that they shouldn't be doing this. But she leaned in and asked what the problem really was. If they were honest, she pointed out he and her husband weren't even blood relatives. Not a single drop connected them. Everything would be fine as long as they didn't get caught. She smiled and said softly that it would be their little secret. Then, with a suggestive tone, she asked, "Shall they start now?" After completing his conversation with his sister-in-law, Chanoke went to a bank ATM to carry out a transaction. While checking his account balance, he was stunned to see the amount deposited. Without wasting time, he immediately called his sister-in-law and mentioned in disbelief that he had only requested 3 million won, but had received 10 million won instead. On the other end, she calmly replied that she had sent the money and jokingly referred to it as alimony for the little secret they shared that day. Confused and caught off guard, he questioned the term alimony, but before he could say more, she abruptly hung up after saying, "Yes, you're done by." He tried to continue, insisting he wasn't finished talking, but the call had already ended. As he stood there with his phone in hand, he began to wonder if this was meant to be compensation. A deep sense of worry clouded his face, and his thoughts grew conflicted. He recalled her earlier words, how she had said she didn't think he was the type of little brother who would disagree. She had teasingly added that she never expected him to have such a cute side, and suggested that he must have imagined a wrestling scenario with his older brother's wife. Embarrassed, he had told her that he wasn't the kind of person she thought he was, but she had laughed and responded that his face suggested otherwise. She had then warned that continuing in that way wasn't good for his body and told him to stop. She had tried to encourage him by inviting him to join her training session, calling him brother-in-law and urging him to try it with her, but he apologized and declined. When she inquired about his actions, he had told her that no matter how hard tried, he didn't think he could go through the session with her. He had resolved to find another way to come up with the money. With a firm tone, he had asked her to pretend that he had never come that day, then quietly said goodbye and walked away. She had silently watched him leave, her thoughts lingering on how Chanoke remained the same innocent man who still didn't understand the gravity of his situation. She reflected that he was truly in a miserable state and wondered if he believed he had made the right choice. Yet, despite everything, she had softly said she would wait for him, because deep down, she knew he would return eventually. Back in the present, Chanoke was on the phone with his son. He told him that he had just sent the money and advised him to use it sparingly this time. He inquired when his son would be coming home and reminded him to stay in touch if he had any plans. After ending the call, he stood silently, lost in thought, the earlier incident with his sister-in-law replaying in his mind. Her voice echoed in his memory, stating that it had been a while and that she could give him more. As the flashbacks faded, He tried to shake off the thoughts, murmuring to himself that it had been a brief mistake. But before he could dwell further, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name Shin Jae-hui, and he paused, reflecting on who was calling. Upon answering, he greeted her and noted how it had been a while. She responded cheerfully, saying that she had been doing well, all thanks to him. She laughed warmly, and he returned her smile, asking what prompted the call, if something had happened. She reassured him that nothing was wrong and asked if he was free that evening, as she wanted to invite him to dinner. He told her that he was available, to which she happily replied that it was good to hear. She mentioned that she had received a generous bonus this time and explained that she wanted to treat him to dinner. He chuckled and called her a silly girl, telling her that it was all right and she didn't need to do that, especially since she probably needed the money more. But she insisted. She told him that it was the least she could do, given everything she had received from him. She had nothing else to offer, and treating him to dinner was the only thing within her means to express gratitude. She asked if he could at least allow her that small gesture in return for what he had done for her. Later, Chanoke arrived at Chong. As he took in his surroundings, he reflected on how much had changed since the last time he had been there. Everything felt different. The ambiance, the air, even the vibe had shifted. Just then, a familiar voice called out from behind. It was Shin Jae-hui, waving at him cheerfully as she approached. He looked at her and wondered why she had chosen to dress in such a manner. He questioned if she was truly embracing her femininity now. She looked radiant, full of youthful energy, and as she walked toward him, he found himself thinking about how wonderful it must feel to be that young. His gaze briefly drifted to the scar on her leg, and his memory took him back to the moment she had been stabbed there, a moment filled with blood and chaos. Returning to the present, she asked him playfully if he had been thinking of something exciting about her. He quickly denied it, saying that his mind was just full of random thoughts. She pressed him further, wanting to know what exactly he had been thinking, but he brushed it off again. She pointed out that his eyes were telling a different story, and her words annoyed him. He threatened to leave, but she playfully declared that she wouldn't let him and burst into laughter. She wrapped her arm around his, and he questioned what kind of woman would casually hook her arm around someone like that. She replied that she simply felt like it. He looked at her in disbelief, asking what he was supposed to do with her, how she could feel comfortable hugging someone in his 40s. She replied sweetly that she would only do that with a mister who took good care of her. He looked at her again and sighed, urging her that they should get going, or else they would be late. She agreed, and the two of them began walking together toward the hotel where their dinner reservation had been made. As they made their way to the restaurant, their conversation flowed naturally. He asked her if her leg had fully recovered, and she confirmed that it was, even saying she could run without any issue now, all thanks to him. He expressed relief, but remarked that it was a shame nothing could be done about the scar. She simply smiled and said that it would fade with time, and then burst into laughter again. He acknowledged with a faint nod that it was truly good to see her cheerful again after every. Her eyes lit up as she responded, saying that she felt the same. She genuinely liked the version of herself that she had become late. There was a shy gleam in her expression as she admitted that this moment almost felt like she was out on a date with her boyfriend. Not expecting such a remark, he turned toward her with a confused look and instinctively attempted to pull his arm away, trying to maintain some distance. But she quickly laughed it off, her voice playful and teasing, assuring him that she was only joking. Despite the awkward moment, the atmosphere between them didn't sour. Soon, the two arrived in front of a grand hotel. She motioned toward the entrance and casually informed him that everything had already been arranged. Reservations were made, and there was no room for second thoughts now. Her voice carried a calm confidence, reassuring him not to worry as she would handle everything from here on. As he stood still and stared at the hotel's lavish structure, a sense of discomfort crept over him. The place looked extravagant, clearly far beyond what he was accustomed to. It reeked of wealth and high society, and he found himself wondering how much it must have cost. Before he could dwell on it too long, she told him she would go in first to check where their table had been reserved. She instructed him to wait outside and not to wander off. He nodded, muttered a quiet okay, and watched her disappear through the glass doors. Alone again, he leaned against a pillar and let his thoughts spiral. He couldn't help but feel like a complete failure. Even though he had been invited, the fact that he was being treated to a meal by a much younger woman, A woman about the same age as his daughter, no less, left a bitter taste in his mouth. Worse still was the realization that he hadn't even treated his own daughter properly. He questioned what kind of man he had become. He glanced around at the opulent surroundings, the perfectly clean sidewalks, the gleaming surfaces, the luxury boutiques, and the polished vehicles. The atmosphere suffocated him. He hated how out of place he felt in these affluent neighborhoods. He told himself that this wasn't his world. He didn't belong here. People around him strolled confidently, clad in designer clothes, carrying expensive handbags, and chatting in polished voices. Foreign luxury cars rolled by as if they were the standard, not the exception. He stared at one of them and thought bitterly that anyone riding in such a vehicle must be from a different league altogether. And then, as if fate decided to play another cruel joke, a luxurious car pulled up nearby. A man stepped out, dressed in an elegant suit, his every movement exuding power and confidence. The man looked to be around the same age as him. At first, he thought nothing of it until he got a proper look at the man's face. His heart froze. He blinked in disbelief. Then again, he recognized his older brother. For a moment, he was overcome with a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. He wondered why his brother was here. Then came a contradictory wave of relief. He considered that it might be a good thing. If he had lingered with the woman who invited him any longer, the situation might have escalated in the wrong direction. But soon his curiosity took over, and his eyes scanned for whoever was accompanying his brother. He wondered who the woman with him was. At first glance, he thought it might be his sister-in-law. But as he looked more carefully, he realized this woman was someone else entirely. Whoever she wasn't the woman married to his brother. Then he noticed something else. His older brother was smiling. He found it strange, as his brother wasn't the kind to smile easily or warmly, not unless he was with someone special. He wondered if she was perhaps a business associate or a companion for some formal gathering. Yet something about the scene didn't sit right. He watched them with intense curiosity, trying to piece things together. The woman looked oddly familiar, though he couldn't place her face immediately. As he stared, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind him. Shin Jae-hui had come to fetch him, calling out that he could come in now. She urged him to hurry up, but he didn't react. He was too absorbed in the sight before him. She called out again, her voice slightly louder and tinged with confusion, wondering why he wasn't responding. His face had turned pale, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and repulsion. He couldn't take his eyes off the woman. Jae-hui followed his gaze and turned her attention to the couple he had been watching. Her reaction was immediate. She gasped and mumbled in disbelief. She recognized the woman instantly as her aunt. Her mind raced as she tried to understand what she was seeing. She noted that her aunt, now divorced, was technically free to do as she pleased, but she questioned why it had to be today and why here. Her embarrassment surfaced instantly, and she tried to brush it off with a nervous laugh. She joked about how unexpected it was to see her aunt here, and then encouraged him to come up, saying their table was waiting. But Chanoke wasn't listening anymore. He had finally recognized the woman as his ex-wife. Time seemed to slow. His thoughts collapsed into chaos. He questioned if this could truly be real. He marveled at the improbability of the encounter and wondered why it was happening now. He felt as if fate was mocking him. Memories of her flooded back. Their conversations, arguments, the life they once shared. And now here she was, standing beside his older brother, smiling, laughing, and at ease. He felt an urge to scream. He wondered how she could smile like that in front of his own brother. He questioned if she was pretending or if this was some kind of illusion. His mind rejected reality, even as his eyes confirmed it. Jae-wee stood beside him, equally shaken. Her face mirrored his discomfort, disturbed, embarrassed, unsure. Just then, as if the sky itself had taken pity on their state, it began to rain. Chanoke turned to her and spoke softly. He apologized, noting that the rain didn't look like it would stop anytime soon, and suggested it was best they canceled dinner for tonight. She nodded quietly and told him that she understood. She said he should head home and take care of himself. He agreed, saying they could meet again another time. She watched him leave, standing there alone in the rain, her expression a blend of embarrassment and helplessness. As Chanoke walked away, his mind felt like it would explode from the weight of what he had just seen. His ex-wife, smiling, next to his brother. He replayed the image in his head again and again, still unable to believe it. Rage simmered inside him, mixed with regret. A part of him wanted to turn back, confront them both, and demand answers, but he questioned what that would solve. Deep down, he knew this situation hadn't happened overnight. It had started long ago, with his own failures. He wondered if things would have been different, if he had been better, worked harder, or tried to keep their family together. His thoughts wandered again to his sister-in-law and her recent words. She had told him that facing the truth, no matter how painful, might ease the burden in his heart. She had said living in denial only made things worse. Her voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that she had tried to knock some sense into him. She had told him he looked too sullen lately, like someone stuck in the same rut forever. She had also admitted to struggling, saying she had her own problems and sensitivities. She had mocked him, stating it was no surprise his ex-wife had moved on, going to gyms and doing workouts with other men while he just stood still. She had vowed that both of them would get revenge, her on her cheating husband and him on his ex-wife. Now, walking through the rain, Chanoke realized something. She had been right, and in that moment, soaked and disillusioned, he made up his mind. He was going to see his sister-in-law. He went to his sister-in-law's house, and as soon as she opened the door, she looked at him in surprise and remarked with a teasing tone, "Look who's here." Her eyes quickly scanned his drenched appearance, rainwater dripping from his clothes, and she asked him why he was completely soaked. In response, he told her that perhaps the rain had simply been unavoidable. She gave him a curious look and questioned why he was acting so strangely, referring to him in a playful manner as her brother-in-law. However, he didn't directly address her question. Instead, he muttered something cryptic about revenge, implying that what he had in mind was a kind of payback that would be fitting for those involved. After entering the house, he quietly shut the door behind him and turned the lock. Facing his sister-in-law, he told her that he wanted to have a wrestling session right there in the house. However, she couldn't immediately grasp what he meant and asked him to wait a moment. Confused, she asked why he was suddenly behaving this way, wondering aloud whether the once obedient man had now transformed into a wolf. Looking at him closely, she questioned him further, accusing him of spending all the money she had given him in less than half a day. But he wasn't interested in that topic. Instead, he admitted that he had seen Min Young and his brother together. That sight had etched itself deep into his mind, replaying over and over like a broken memory. It was that very scene that had unsettled him so deep. He tried to explain everything to his sister-in-law, telling her that after witnessing the two of them together, many things had become clearer to him, especially her words and actions from earlier. The things she had said about seeking revenge had taken on a new meaning. So, setting aside his pride, he asked her again, without any shame, if the proposal she had made to him earlier was still valid. She stared at him with a mix of sarcasm and disbelief, asking whether he even knew what shame meant. Her words dripped with irony as she reminded him how he had shown up out of nowhere, asked her for money, and then had the nerve to reject her offer cold. And now, only half a day later, he had the audacity to return and ask whether her proposal was still on the table. She scoffed, telling him that he had to be joking. She demanded to know what exactly he had realized and whether he had finally grown tired of lying to himself. With a biting tone, she asked what he planned to do next. Then, her expression shifted as she suggested they pick up from where they had left off, that intense moment they shared. She proposed they continue with a cardio session, just the two of them. She admitted that she actually appreciated the fact that he had come to find her after seeing the truth with his own eyes. Because of that, she was willing to give him another chance, but only with one condition. The humiliation he had made her endure earlier would now be repaid with interest. She told him it had been a while since she had felt this way, so as her brother-in-law, he would now have to work hard to train her through the cardio session. If he managed to do that properly, then maybe, just maybe, she would consider allowing him to train with her again in the future. And so the two of them began their intense cardio and workout session inside the house. While they were training, he commented that he hadn't even done much yet, and she already seemed to be struggling. But she quickly countered his remark with sarcasm, questioning whether he really thought she would be satisfied with such mild training. She brought up the earlier rejection and the humiliation she felt because of him, making it clear that this light workout wouldn't be nearly enough to make up for it. Um, Looking embarrassed, he quietly admitted that he understood her point. Still, she firmly stated that no matter what happened, she wasn't going to take responsibility for anything that might follow. She demanded that he promise her that much, but instead of directly agreeing, He remarked that he had never imagined she could act with such arrogance. Then, with a hint of bitterness, she questioned why someone who behaved like this had still failed to please his ex-wife. During the intense gaming session that followed, she was also having her own thoughts. She realized that if they kept going like this, she might not be able to hold back. Compared to the man who had treated her harshly and couldn't even handle his own impulses, the situation now felt entirely different. Minyoung had just finished showering in the hotel room when she stepped out of the bathroom and was startled to find Chanyol pacing and yelling into his phone. He appeared agitated, his voice sharp and commanding. He was on a call with someone, shouting at him in frustration. Chanyol demanded to know why the report had only just been made, accusing the other person of having a death wish and pressing him for details. He insisted on knowing exactly when the boy had arrived, emphasizing that he needed the information urgently. Minyoung stood behind him, slightly confused and concerned, quietly calling his name, Chanyol. But he didn't acknowledge her presence. His focus remained fixed on the call, as he continued giving strict instructions, telling the person on the other end that he was on his way and warning them not to let the boy out of their sight. He continued hurling curses through the phone, his tone growing darker. Still puzzled, Minyoung asked him why he looked so troubled and if something serious had happened. But Chanyel brushed off her concern, telling her that he needed to leave immediately. His voice was cold and distant as he told her to amuse herself and that he'd call her later. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Chanoke was fully engaged in an intense workout session with his sister-in-law. The session had become increasingly intense, and she was beginning to feel overwhelmed. The sound of heavy rain outside the house only added to the atmosphere, soaking the silence with a persistent drumming on the windows. Once the workout session ended, she turned toward him, her voice holding a trace of concern, and asked whether he was leaving already. The rain was pouring hard outside, and she gently suggested that he stay the night instead of heading out into the storm. But he responded with polite firmness, explaining that he had work the next day and believed it would be better to go home now. She sighed softly and replied that it was a pity. She had hoped he might consider staying over. She then added that if he ever did, they could talk more constructively next time. He nodded with a small smile, agreeing that such a conversation would be good when the right moment arrived. With that, he began to take his leave. Before he stepped outside, she handed him an umbrella, her expression still unreadable. He thanked her and said he would be heading home now, asking her to take care. Her eyes held a deeper emotion as she softly reminded him not to forget the mixed feelings he had experienced that day. The very emotions, she said, that he had unknowingly stirred within her. He paused for a brief second, looking into her eyes, and told her that he wouldn't forget. Then, without another word, he stepped out of the house and into the downpour. As he made his way through the rain, his mind remained a whirlwind of thoughts. He found himself committing again to what had happened, whispering to himself, as if trying to interpret an unspoken message from her. His thoughts swirled around the entire workout session and the strange emotional energy that lingered afterward. But his mind soon drifted further, back into a painful past. He couldn't help but recall that moment when he had once seen Minyoung with Chanyol, an image that continued to haunt him. Still walking through the storm, his head throbbed with a growing ache. He muttered that he needed to rest, hoping that reaching home would give him a moment of peace. But when he finally arrived, something immediately felt off. He froze upon noticing that the front door was slightly ajar. Outside the entrance, a pair of unfamiliar shoes caught his attention, women's heels. A strange unease crept through him as he questioned who could be there at this hour. He cautiously stepped inside, his heart pounding, and the sight that met his eyes left him utterly shocked. Standing there, as if untouched by the time that had passed between them, was his ex-wife Minyoung. For a moment, he stood completely still, unable to believe what he was seeing. His voice faltered as he asked her why she was there. But she didn't answer his question directly. Instead, she glanced at the rain outside and asked where he had just come from, addressing him as husband, a title that no longer belonged to their present, yet somehow still lingered in her tone. He stood there, utterly shocked and unable to believe what had just happened. He questioned her, asking how she could have come inside like that and walked in without permission. Minyoung calmly explained that he had not changed his passcode, so she wondered why she was suddenly not allowed to enter. He looked at her with a mixture of confusion and exhaustion, telling her that he didn't know what she was up to and since it was late, she should just go home. She returned his gaze steadily, remarking that he had changed. He no longer even looked her in the eyes. She asked if his feelings for her had already disappeared completely, or if perhaps there was another woman in his life now. He raised his voice in shock, demanding what she was saying and what she meant by such accusation. She quickly reassured him that she had only been teasing, questioning why he was so frustrated. Apologizing, she said she didn't mean to upset or anger him, but she had missed him. That was why she had come. She spoke about how much they had suffered over time and how difficult it was to be entirely alone even though they were separated. Before, he had always been by her side, supporting her no matter what, but now, without anyone else, she felt miserable and lonely. He pleaded with Min Young not to act like that, reminding her that their relationship was already over and that if she kept behaving this way, it would only make things more uncomfortable for both of them. He confessed that he was too tired that day and begged her to stop, urging her to go back home. She remained standing there, stunned and silent. After a moment, he said he would leave and told her to do whatever she wanted. Refusing to let him go so easily, she grabbed him by the arm, calling him Chanoke and asking why he had become so cold and distant. She reminded him of the kindness he always showed her, regardless of who she was. She pleaded with him not to say that things weren't right between them, pointing out that they had two healthy children together and that he was still the only one she had in her life. He didn't respond at first, but then, unexpectedly, he wrapped his arms around her and apologized. He admitted that he had been emotional lately and confessed that he had missed her very much as well. He thanked her for coming to see him and said how much he truly wanted to see her. At that moment, his thoughts drifted to Yunhui's earlier words, reminding him that they were in the same difficult situation and that even though he already understood this, he had to be careful about every action he took moving forward. Yunhui had warned him to act normally and keep things as if nothing had happened, because if the other party found out, it would mean disaster for both of them. He knew he had to pretend ignorance, while Minyoung had to appear as though nothing was wrong. That night, Chanok and Minyoung finished their yoga session together. The next morning, Chanok was lying on his bed when he checked his phone and noticed multiple missed calls from his sister-in-law. He immediately tried to call her back, but the operator informed him that her phone was switched off and asked him to try again later. He wondered why she would turn off her phone like that. Unable to shake the unease growing in his chest, Chanok stepped outside his house, his mind racing with thoughts. He told himself it couldn't be happening, that something must be wrong. Suddenly, his phone rang again. It was his sister-in-law. She apologized profusely for oversleeping and missing his calls, asking if he was there. Before he could respond properly, Chanok was abruptly attacked from behind. His mind went blank as he struggled to understand what was happening. He found himself in a dusty, dark place, his head covered with something so he could see nothing. When he finally regained consciousness, he realized he was tied up with ropes and surrounded by several men inside what looked like a warehouse. To his shock, he also spotted his sister-in-law there, restrained and in miserable condition, clearly under the control of the same group of men. Beside her stood Chanyol, who was verbally abusing and insulting her. He sarcastically asked if she had eaten something nice lately because her throat seemed to have healed. He asked how long this had been going on, adding that it had been quite a while. Then, turning toward Chanok, Chanyol smirked with a dark, mocking expression on his face. Chanok demanded an explanation from Yunhui, his voice tight with disbelief and desperation. His heart was pounding, and he couldn't comprehend the scene unfolding before him. Yunhui stood frozen in place, her face pale and drenched in guilt. She looked utterly devastated, barely able to meet his gaze. Trembling, she apologized, her voice breaking as she told him how sorry she was that he had been caught up in all of this, how none of it was supposed to involve him, yet somehow, because of her, he had been dragged into the chaos. Before either of them could say another word, Chanyol stormed forward, his face twisted with rage. His voice thundered through the warehouse as he lashed out at Yunhui. He accused her of shamelessness, demanding to know if she had a death wish, asking how she dared to speak so openly to Chanok right in front of him.